Hey, Larkin Rose here. What would it be like to live in a lawless society? This is a thing that comes up a lot. People saying, well, I can't picture what it would be like to live with no law. Wouldn't it be chaos and mayhem and death and destruction? So let's look at the notion of what it means to not have law. In the political sense, law is threats made up by the ruling class. Whether it's you're not allowed to commit murder or you're not allowed to grow lettuce and sell it to people unless you comply with these 1,000 pages of regulation. Those are both law. But when people talk about like there's no law, they're often very vague in their own head what they're even talking about because they're so used to a society in which there's a ruling class and it gives all these rules and commands and it hurts people who disobey. And most people don't really know how to picture a world without that, and so they think that, well, if this is the source of order and civilization, like law in a legal system, then without it, it would be chaos and bloody mayhem and this and that and the other thing. So I want to describe what lawlessness would actually mean, what it would literally mean, and what it would look like. Again, a law is a command issued by politicians. Now, a lot of people assume, even though it's sort of ridiculous, they assume that, well, if there was no law, people could do whatever they wanted and there would be no consequences. The people who say this or assume it or think that just haven't thought about it enough. Because to say that is to say that if somebody attacked you, you would just let them. You wouldn't do anything to them if there wasn't a politician scribble in a law book somewhere saying they're not allowed to do that. Really? You wouldn't defend yourself? You wouldn't defend somebody else? You don't think anybody else would defend themselves? The law is scribbles on paper, and that's all. Now, there are thugs with guns who enforce the law, and a lot of people assume that, well, they're the ones who protect us, which most of the time, no, they're not. But okay, you were taught that and you repeat that and you believe that, and then it's easy to jump to the bogus conclusion that, well, without them, without law enforcers and without politicians, enacting these acts of legislation, everybody could just do whatever they want. But it's ridiculous because to say that there would be no consequences is to demonstrate that you have no idea how human nature works and how cause and effect work. Like in a society, I like to use the example of, okay, let's say you and 100 people you don't know, you got shipwrecked or your plane crashed and now you're on a big desert island and it's just you. Do you think everybody would just immediately resort to attacking and killing and eating each other? No, obviously not. Most people don't want that. They want to cooperate. They want to organize. They want to figure out how to do things. And if somebody decided to run around attacking people, the idea that there would be no consequences to his actions are ridiculous. If he attacked me, there would be consequences. In fact, if he attacked somebody else in front of me, there would be consequences to his actions. Law is not the source of the consequence. People deciding to do something about it. Now, whether it's people deciding because they get paid to carry a gun and enforce the whims of politicians, or because people don't want to get attacked, either way, there's a consequence to attacking people. And so when people talk about lawlessness, they're not sure what they mean. And there's so much about, the mythology, the political mythology we were all taught, that people talk in terms that they've never thought about and don't really understand. The concept of law and crime and government and authority and a whole bunch of things that they've just never really focused on enough to be clear about it. For example, no law, a society with no law. I could say, in a society that didn't have a ruling class, hey, just so everybody knows, if somebody breaks into my house late at night, there's a good chance I'm going to shoot him. Like if I think he's a threat to me or my family, I may just shoot him. If I have a chance to, like if I can see who he is and see he's not a threat, I might not have to. But if you break into my house, you might get shot. That's just a description of reality. That's not a law. However, it's a pretty good deterrent to anybody planning on doing that if they realize, oh, he has a gun and he just told me he's going to shoot me. In fact, it doesn't even need to be a threat. Like if I didn't say it out loud, that's just, well, that's what I would do. it still creates a deterrent. If people are thinking, if I'm attacking people all over the place and trying to steal their stuff, eventually one of them's not going to like it and is going to do something about it, and he might shoot me or beat me up or something or whatever. The consequence doesn't go away just because a scribble went away, a politician's scribble, legislation, law. Of course there would still be consequences. And there could even still be threats. Like I said, I can either just describe what I would do if somebody broke into my house, or I can put a thing out front that says, if you break into my house, I'm going to shoot you. And, there are shop owners in the LA riots and in other places that did this. Put a thing outside that if you loot my place, I'm just going to shoot you. Is that a law? Nope. Was that like a legislative decree? Nope. Did it require any special authority? Nope. Did it require a legislature? Nope. Was it moral? Well, you can decide that. I happen to think self-defense is legitimate. They weren't pretending to make up a new right just by writing those words on the front of their shop. They were telling people, don't break in here or we're going to freaking shoot you. That's not law. You don't need a law to deter people. And by the way, that deterred people way better than the entire LAPD and the entire law enforcement disaster during those riots, is people saying, if you break in here, I'm going to shoot you. That wasn't a law. Worked really well. Everywhere else was having riots, and I think it was Korean shops, a bunch of them did that, like got AR-15s and were up on the roofs with signs saying, if you try to loot us, we're just going to shoot you. Not surprisingly, the looters went to other places where they wouldn't be shot. So the deterrent doesn't require politician scribbles. The politicians aren't the one deterring anybody. Like, you can say that sometimes their armed thugs do, although mostly what they do is commit aggression instead of defend against it. But this notion of lawlessness and the idea that that means a free-for-all and no consequence and no deterrence to crime is silly, and it's a result of people just not really thinking things through about, okay, well, what would I do? Like, if there wasn't politicians, there wasn't 911, there weren't tax collectors and cops, would I just sit around and let myself be victimized? No. I might get a gun. I might get together with some of my neighbors and say, hey, if something goes wrong, do you want to call each other? Like, if there's somebody dangerous out there and shows up, like, I'll call you, come running if somebody's, attacking me or my property, and you call me if somebody's attacking your property, and we'll help each other out. Of course those things happen naturally, and they're not law, and they don't require authority. But if people are so, again, if they're so indoctrinated in the mindset of little children, which is what statism is. It's teaching people, including grown-ups, it's not up to you to fix anything or defend yourself or care for the poor or do anything. You just do as you're told and do your thing on your hamster wheel over and over again. And if anything out of the ordinary happens, call the authorities and let them handle it. That whole mindset is training people to be stupid children. And so a lot of people don't have any practice thinking as responsible adults. Like, all right, if there's somebody breaking into my neighbor's house, well, why isn't it my responsibility just as much as anybody else's? Like, I'm the one here. I can call the cops and wait for 15 minutes and hope they show up to draw a chalk outline around my dead neighbor. Or I can decide, well, I'm a grown-up, I have a gun, I better go try to save them or do something. And so when people are in the childish mindset of it doesn't even occur to them to try to do anything, they project that onto everybody else. And they decide nobody would do anything about thieves and crooks and murderers because they wouldn't. And the thing is, I don't even think that's true. Because if they realized, wow, nobody's coming to save me, they would do something. They would very quickly get into the mindset of, well, damn, I better figure out what to do. Instead of just sitting here, being a sitting duck, they would figure it out. And you can actually see this in a bunch of examples where some horrible thing is happening, some flood is happening, and people are suddenly like, authority ain't here to fix anything. We better start being like grown-ups and helping each other and cooperating and doing whatever we have to take care of each other and whatever else. People are totally capable of that, but they're trained not to think that way. And because of that training, they imagine lawlessness, as in there isn't a ruling class telling us what to do. They imagine that equals chaos, which is just a stupid thing to believe. But it's a little bit understandable the way they've been indoctrinated. But to think that without politician scribbles, the rest of us would just let nasty sociopaths walk all over us and victimize us without doing anything, that's just silly to the point of being ridiculous. The idea that lawlessness equals chaos is patently stupid, because it really does imply that if the politicians didn't say people aren't allowed to rob us and beat us up, then we would just let them. All of us, every single one of us. There would be no consequence to a thug or a thief or a murderer, because we'd all just say, well, darn, I wish there was a politician here to write something down on a piece of paper, because, gee, I don't know how on earth we'd ever defend ourselves, like individually or working together, without a politician writing something on a piece of paper. But that shows the immaturity of the statist mindset, and that is on purpose. That's programmed into people on purpose so that they view the world that way, so that they view the world as dangerous, scary chaos unless we have a ruling class taking care of us and helping the poor and the old and protecting us from scary foreigners and terrorists and criminals and yada, 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 and everything else. And the truth of the matter is, lawlessness would be a huge step in the right direction. Even if it was overnight, even if it was among a population that isn't used to thinking in terms of being personally responsible, because they would get into that mindset really dang quickly out of necessity, because there wouldn't be an authority to come save the day or pretend it was going to save the day. Lawlessness doesn't mean, it's synonymous with chaos and everybody, death and destruction, blah, blah, blah. That's not at all what it would mean. What it would mean is none of those people would recognize anybody else as having the right to rule. And that's all. That's literally all it would mean. It doesn't mean they all suddenly forget that they have the right to defend themselves, or suddenly forget that they have the right to work together with other people and organize and cooperate and do all sorts of voluntary-based things that don't require slaves and don't require masters. Lawlessness would be a huge step in the right direction, but the connotation of the word, because of people's indoctrination, is so scary to people. And just for sort of a mental exercise, I would suggest that anybody scared of a lawless world, ask yourself, just, clearly think out, if there's a bunch of scenarios, well, I'm scared of this and this and this, first thing is, well, what would you do about it? What if there are roving gangs of bandits? Well, what would you do? Would you stand out in the road with all your stuff and go, come take my stuff, durr? Would you maybe hide it? Would you run away? Would you get a gun? What would you do? And then what would the people in your family do? What would your neighbors do? What would neighbors farther out do? What would all the people you know do? And try to figure out what would actually happen, instead of just jumping to this bizarre, silly assumption that if not for politicians bossing us around, we would just have no idea what to do about anything. That's just utterly ridiculous. But that's what the entire notion of lawlessness conveys. It conveys the idea that most people really think we're all wild, stupid animals unless politicians are telling us what to do. And that's ridiculous. Lawlessness would be a huge improvement over what we have now. And if you doubt it, consider how much theft and thuggery and kidnapping and violence and even murder is committed in the name of law. That would immediately go away. Because most of the people who carry out that stuff only do it because they believe in authority, and they think that, well, I'm just doing my job. When I kidnap this person and steal his stuff because we caught him with a plant that the politicians said he wasn't allowed to have. You're an evil bastard. And in normal life, you wouldn't have done that. But you believe in law and order, meaning let's idiotically enforce whatever stupid arbitrary whim the politicians dream up this week. That doesn't lead to order. It doesn't lead to peace. It doesn't lead to civilization and morality. It leads to violent conflict and injustice. Whereas in that case, if you compare lawlessness to the war on drugs, lawlessness is way more orderly and moral and just than the law enforcement of the war on drugs. And I could use, a dozen other examples of stupid laws, taxation and extortion all over the place that make everything worse. So, it's a testament to how how successful the statist indoctrination has been that most people are genuinely scared of the thought of a world in which politicians aren't writing down stupid crap on paper and calling it law. As if that is what makes us civilized and peaceful and moral and treating each other with respect. No, it freaking isn't. It's the exact opposite. It's what pits us against each other, and it's what dupes society into putting up with extortion and violent aggression and a bunch of evil stuff because, well, it was legal and it was done by authority and it was the law, so that makes it okay, right? Wrong. So, yeah, if you're scared of a lawless world, look around at the lawful world with lots and lots of law enforcers and lawmakers and literally the mass murder that has happened in the last century and 2 centuries. You can go back as many centuries as you want. And the extortion and everything else. That is what law does more often than not, is it legitimizes immoral, violent aggression. If you do away with that, it doesn't make everybody suddenly not care about being victimized. It doesn't make them not care about morality and not care about their neighbors. All it does is remove the biggest excuse for immoral, violent aggression. So, hooray for lawlessness. Not what most people think that would mean, but what it would actually mean in a society of people who would suddenly have to grow up and act like adults instead of these stupid little idiot children of a bunch of tyrants.